what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Later today I have meetings to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Ian Gray.
2 weeks ago, I asked the First Minister if he would match Labour's election promise to protect our schools and hospitals. He said yes. Was he telling the truth?
First Minister.
Well, as Ian Gray knows, I always aspire to tell the truth at First Minister's questions, as indeed does every member of this Parliament. I'd have thought that during the election campaign, the SNP wished to have a position where we could more than match any of the London parties in terms of the future of the Scottish economy, and recognised that that could only be done by having economic powers in Scotland to enable us to grow the economy and get people back to work.
Ian Gray.
Presiding Officer, the First Minister also aspired to win 20 seats last Thursday, and he fell pretty far short then.
Order.
Yeah, it's just like a baker's dozen is 13 instead of 12. A salmon score 6 instead of 20. But I suspect the First Minister probably couldn't bring himself to read the Scottish press the day after the election. But if he had, he would have read that 700 jobs are to go in Lothian NHS. Mental health provision in Ayrshire and Arran is being slashed and a new kidney unit cancelled, and 500 cleaning hours are being cut at Glasgow Royal Infirmary. When he told this chamber he would protect the NHS, was he covering up these cuts, or does he just not know what's going on? Is the First Minister shameless or just clueless?
First Minister.
NHS spending across Scotland this year is £264 million higher. That is a budget increase for the National Health Service in Scotland, despite the reduction of £500 million in the Scottish Government's budget. Now, before Ian Gray moves into full oppositionist mode and tries to deny responsibility for the budget cuts currently visited upon Scotland by his previous Labour government, and before he tries to refight the general election, as I remember the general election, the Labour Party's claim was that if people in Scotland voted Labour, they would be protected from Conservative government. People in Scotland did vote Labour. Labour won 41 seats, and we now have a Conservative government at Westminster.
Order.
On Monday, the Prime Minister announced at 5:05 that he was opening talks with the Liberal Democrats to form a progressive alliance, which he said would be much better for the country. At 8:49, John Reid came on television to say, "I think the decision to try and enter a Lib-Lab-Pact coalition is potentially disastrously wrong for the country, for the party and for Gordon himself." Now, if we get the extraordinary position of Labour having failed to win the election, despite gathering the support of the Scottish people, and then ducking the opportunity to form an anti-Tory government, how on earth can Ian Gray or any other Labour MSP come to this chamber and start complaining about the Tory cuts to come?
Ian Gray.
Presiding Officer, we'll get to the Tory cuts to come in a moment. But at 11 a.m. this very morning, unions emerged from a meeting with Greater Glasgow Health Board where they were presented with this plan, a plan to cut over 1,200 jobs out of Glasgow's NHS. This year, over half are nurses and midwives. Is this what the First Minister calls protecting our NHS?
First Minister.
NHS spending in Scotland this year is higher in real terms than it was in previous years, despite the £500 million of cuts. There is a theory which is currently abroad that the reason that so many Labour MPs preferred opposition to government, why so many Labour MPs were unwilling to allow the talks to progress on a Labour Liberal Democrat Progressive alliance, is they wanted to spend the next 5 years absolving themselves of any responsibility for the economic crisis they visited upon this country and for the huge public spending cuts to come. Is there anybody in the Labour benches who really doesn't know that the Labour Party's own plans in presenting cuts which were to be tougher and deeper than those of Margaret Thatcher involved £25 billion of public spending cuts in Scotland over the next 10 to 15 years? Or are we really to be presented with the alibi that it's all the fault of the Tories and the Liberal Democrats?
No, Presiding Officer. These cuts are his fault. This document makes clear who asked for this plan. It was the Scottish Government Health Department on the 9th of April. Nicola Sturgeon isn't letting these cuts happen. She is demanding them of the Health Board. If voters had known what this lot are up to, they wouldn't have given them 6 seats, never mind 20. Yes, there are £6 billion of cuts coming from the condemned parties over there. But this is the alliance that Alex Salmond is part of. Cuts, cuts, cuts. Yesterday Alex Salmond wrote to David Cameron telling him he doesn't want cuts here. Can I suggest he uses his mighty hand to write to his own health secretary and tell her we don't want her cuts in our hospitals?
First Minister.
When the then Chancellor of the Exchequer promised at the start of the election campaign that the cuts would be coming and they would be tougher and deeper than those of Margaret Thatcher, he wasn't talking about the cuts to come from the Conservative and the Liberals. He was talking about the cuts under the Labour Party. When the Labour Party went to the people and said, vote Labour and we'll stop the Tories, they forgot to mention that they were going to lose 100 seats south of the border and a Tory government would come regardless of how Scotland voted. And when I meet the Prime Minister in the very near future, wouldn't it be a tremendous asset if I was able to say that the Scottish Government and the leading opposition party in Scotland were united in wanting to see capital acceleration, borrowing powers, the £180 million fossil fuel levy, the Olympic consequentials that should be running into the Scottish economy, all of the things that were denied us by a Labour administration in Westminster, but now unencumbered by the guilt of office at Westminster, surely our opposition leader can join with the government in asking on behalf of Scotland that these things are done to revive the economy and protect our vital public services.